Board of Managers, October 13th, 2016. This is the day that Bob Dylan was given the Nobel laureate for literature. I'm happy. First item of business, which is not on the agenda, is introduction of new staff. Ms. Sylvia. Good evening and welcome.
Hi. President White, Board of Managers. My name is Luke Menden, and as a new district representative here in the permitting department, I'm just here to tell you a bit about myself. So, I went to school at St. John's University where I got a degree in environmental studies. While still in school, I interned at Rank Associates for a couple summers. With them, I was actually able to do some work within the watershed that conducted several aquatic vegetation surveys, several of your water bodies. When I graduated, I went on to work with Wank full-time in North Dakota. There I worked with an oil company, helping them put together spill prevention plans. I also did many wetland or stormwater inspections, and I assisted in the occasional wetland delineation. What excites me about being here in the district is the chance to expand on my knowledge in Minnesota. I love the state, I've been here my whole life. I think it's beautiful, and to be able to work with an organization that promotes that beauty while working directly with members of the community is something I hold highly. Here, my first week, been involved in the permitting process, got to see what that's like, got on several site inspections. It's kind of nice to see how the two tie together, and I'm happy to be here. Thank you for your time.
It's
Welcome.
good to have you.
That's great.
And you, sir.
Don't lose that enthusiasm.
President White, Board of Managers, my name is Chase Vanderbilt. I am also one of the new district representatives in the permitting department. Last spring, I graduated from the University of Minnesota with a degree in environmental sciences, policy, and management. And for the last 2 summers, I've worked with the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency doing biological monitoring work in streams and rivers around the state. So I firsthand have seen and been in stream qualities from ag ditches all the way up to some of our nicest streams in the state. And I also have an extensive experience in customer service with the public and also hold a degree in carpentry. So I feel like those 2 things together kind of will help me level with and connect with contractors and all other working relationships. I'm really happy to be in the permitting department where there seems to be a really good collaborative environment where, like Luke said, we get to see our hard work in the office, go out in the field and see it actually in person. So that's really nice. And in our first week, we've been learning the permitting process and then also done several site inspections and also an inspection of the site that we're discussing tonight. So that's been really interesting to see this. And I look forward to the future with the Watershed District, and I think it's just going to be overall a really rich experience. So thanks for your time and letting me introduce myself.
We're glad to have you. Welcome.
Thank you.
Manager Olson.
A quick question, have you been able to wean yourself off of the Johnny bread?
Yes, I have. Not an easy task, but I managed.
Well, it's good to have you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Is there anyone here who wishes to address the board in a matter that is not on the agenda or that is on the consent agenda? That would be the minutes. I see no hands. Let's move on to approval of the agenda. Is there a motion to approve?
Move approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and second. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. The consent agenda has just one item, which is approval of the September 22nd minutes. And I'm going to move that to 11.4 on the agenda for a couple of small changes. My report. First of all, I wanted to just commend staff. Item 4.1 on our agenda is an update on the metro area chloride Tmdl and implementation efforts. And I wanted to commend our staff who have been working with other agencies to develop this, and Mr. Smith, who is working on some model policies to implement, and recognize that the remedy that's being put out is a continuation of existing programs. And even on the bottom of our agenda tonight, we have 3 workshops concerning parking lots and sidewalk maintenance. And so it's really to the credit of our water quality and education staff, particularly in that case, and I wanted to thank everyone involved. There will be a Metro Mod meeting next Tuesday. All managers are invited to attend that. The Mod annual meeting is coming up December 1st to 3rd, and we've all gotten an email, I think, about registering for the annual meeting. I've attended 2 meetings or events the last couple of weeks. One I attended with Manager Miller was the Arden Park Concept Planning, first of 3 meetings, I believe it is. City staff, district staff, and Mr. Aberg were all there, and some very engaged residents and kayakers, not residents, making the conversation buzz around those tables as they start that planning process. So kudos to our staff for a great job in organizing that. And I also attended, together with Ms. Clark, the Cottageville Park Pavilion dedication. We were not a speaker, but because we didn't pay for the pavilion, but it was a good program, and they recognized the watershed's contribution, of course, in the stormwater efforts that have been made in that park. So that was a good event. Then I have an executive committee report. We just met in committee earlier this evening. Permit 14219 was struck from the agenda. That has been resolved. We took information and public comment and permittee comment on permit 15-445, and it was the recommendation of the executive committee that the board adopt the action requested by staff, which is further down in the agenda here. Manager Miller, can you give a report on the PPC committee, Planning and Policy Committee?
We met tonight, and James, will you make sure that Manager Blix gets a copy of the handout and the slideshow? We went through the planning and committee, planning department's work program, and et cetera, and I think it'd be useful to see that.
What about Manager Shackleton? Does he not get it?
No, you got to be here to get it.
Just thought I'd mention it.
As always, it's standard practice for those information is circulated. Mr. Whisker.
Just to build on that point, following all the strategic planning meetings that we're having in Planning and Policy Committee, we're putting together the PowerPoints and narrative and minutes into a package that hopefully everybody's getting electronically. And we're obviously open and available for questions and clarifications for folks that aren't available to attend the meeting. And then there was a committee recommendation to the full board this evening. Do you want me to summarize?
Please.
So we reviewed with the committee time-sensitive draft cooperative agreement between the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District and the City of Victoria for partnering on a regional stormwater facility that would treat downtown Victoria through the expansion of existing stormwater facilities on the west end. We plan on bringing the final cooperative agreement back before the board on the 27th for full review and asking authorization for execution. There's some time sensitivity due to staff being out of town due to a death in the family, so we wanted to bring this forward to committee and just provide the information. If there's questions, I can provide a more formal briefing at the end of tonight's meeting if we like, but essentially the board reviewed the term sheet, or the committee reviewed the term sheet and made a recommendation to the Board of Managers that they found the term sheet acceptable and are authorizing staff to advance with the development of an agreement and bring that forward for review and authorization for execution on October 27th.
Can I make a motion?
Manager Olson?
Do you need a motion
On what?
to take his recommendation, to accept his recommendation?
Oh, sure, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Then I would move that we accept that recommendation. So.
Fine. Is there a second?
And committee.
Second.
Any discussion? Those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Great, we'll see that in 2 weeks then. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Whisker.
The CAC did not meet last night, so I have nothing to report on that.
Okay. Are there any other events or meetings that managers would like to report on? Thank you. The upcoming meeting and event schedule is, of course, in the listed here under 8.2 in our agenda. We have no public hearings or presentations, nor any permits requiring variance this evening. We'll move to item 11.1, which is authorization of the compliance order issued. Well, I'm going to call Ms. Sylvia. I just realized that that's going to be struck from the agenda, isn't it? Yes.
Yeah, yes.
And then 11.2, authorization of the compliance order issued for violation of permit 15445. So,
President White, Board of Managers, and the Executive Committee just a short time ago. Staff provided the following information regarding the compliance enforcement related to permit 15445. Staff provided an outline of the compliance process that is generally followed as dictated by the district's enforcement rule, as well as a chronology of the district rule violation that has taken place specifically at the Mooney Lake Preserve under permit 15445, and staff provided its recommendation to adopt the draft findings of fact and conclusions of law and order that has been provided tonight. The applicant had the permittee had an opportunity to address the committee as well as members of the public. Both did provide their comments and statement, and staff recommended to the executive committee to recommend to the full board to adopt the findings of fact and conclusions of law that were prepared and presented tonight. And I can summarize those as well. If
Go
you would
ahead.
like. And so the staff recommended to the committee and the board the following order. The permittee must stabilize the site in accordance with specific terms of the compliance order issued on October 6th and stop land disturbing work other than stabilization until further notice. Also, the permittee must submit an impact analysis showing the extent of grading beyond the approved construction limits, area of disturbance within the 100-year floodplain of Mooney Lake, area of wetland buffer disturbance for wetlands ML, P Pond, and number 1, area of wetland disturbance within wetlands ML, P Pond, and amount of sedimentation within wetland 1. And this must be approved as accurate by staff. And then following this, this impact analysis, the permittee must submit a complete restoration plan for staff approval based on the impact analysis, and it must meet performance standards and compliance set by MCWD rules. And then the permittee must pay the applicable costs of enforcement from staff time and consultant time.
thank you. Is there a motion to adopt the findings of fact,
So
including
moved.
law and order for judgment? There's a motion from Manager Miller. Is there a second?
Second.
Manager Rognes, questions? Manager Blix?
I have a number of questions. The first one would be, I'm just wondering about whether or not the, Mr. Stickney has actually now submitted an application for the additional work that he has stated that he intends to do. Has he actually applied for the additional work yet?
No, he has not.
So when would that occur as part of this order?
So we haven't requested him to apply for like the floodplain alteration, but we are requesting, we need to know, a lot is unknown at this time, and so part of the order is to have an impact analysis done based on information we do know to understand the extent of violation within these rules. And so at that time, we'll be able to require him to come into compliance with those rules through a restoration plan for the site. At this time, it does not take the form of a permit application, but we do know his permit renewal is coming soon at the end of the month, and so staff will be able to make sure that the new rules triggered are accurately addressed.
So the other piece of that is, I guess I'm curious as to, in terms of his claims of wanting to, restore the property and make it, according to him, beautiful, and what that really means. And
Right.
I really am curious as to what the extent of the type of restoration that he's planning to do in the site entails. And I guess I would like to see that, have that detailed for us, so that we are assured that it really is going to meet our standards and the standards that I think the neighbors would expect as well.
Sure. And so by the order, he is required to first, with the impact analysis, show us what has been done, and then submit a restoration plan that will need to meet the rules that had been violated. And so through review of that, staff has the opportunity to make sure that the plan provides the same level of natural resource or ecological integrity that was there before the disturbance.
And if I
Ms.
may,
Quigg.
President White, Board Managers, Manager Blix, to Catherine's point a little bit further as well, Mr. Stickney has submitted a plan that was drafted by Prairie Restorations, and as a plan of action and as also a part of the Wetland Conservation Act no loss application. Upon review, staff has identified portions of the plan that is currently incomplete. So we will be working with Mr. Stickney and his consultants to further address the incompleteness based on once we receive the quantified information of disturbance as well.
And in that review, are we going to, ask whether or not any of the surrounding homeowners, do they have a say in what the plan is going to entail as well? Or is that just going to be, is it going to just be your review?
So as through this process, we've come to understand what staff is capable of doing, and so we, as a district, are, as I understand, are only able to require what our rules require. And so if it happens that what the residents would like to see meets it falls within what we would require within our rules, then that would be met.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I understand that.
Yeah.
But within that, there are some choices that can be made.
Mm-hmm.
I'm well aware of the variety of options that are out there that could be part of the discussion. So part of my question about that is also because it's mentioned that there's going to be a restoration order by the DNR. And so I'm wondering about how that fits into all of this as well. How does that, what does a DNR restoration include as well? And how does that fit into this other work that needs to be done?
I believe that DNR restoration order you're referencing is for 14-219, the violation that had been wrapped up or had been addressed in advance of the meeting. But
Yeah, and so Manager Blix, at this time, it is not clear or quantified if there has been what would count as wetland impact under the Wetland Conservation Act. So those steps have not been taken based on the lack of information that we have at this moment.
Manager Blix, are you finished?
I have a couple more questions, but I'm willing to let other
Manager
people
Rognus?
chime in.
I think I had my hand up first.
Kirk did.
I'm kind of curious about just the mechanics of doing some of this stuff, and establishing how you put back something that really got moved around by the weather or whatever during this past year. Are we going to have to go through a topographic survey of the area? And that would tell me that there would be quite a bit of time involved this fall, and I can't imagine being able to wrap all that by the end of this month.
Manager Rockness to provide a little bit of clarity on that. We are not requesting that the restoration plan be implemented by the end of the month. You are correct in your observation there that there is a
Just the analysis of that
Yep.
line that goes around that one
having
wetland.
having spoken with the contractors just recently, they have been out surveying, and they have that information, which will be
Okay.
submitted to the district, and are willing to work with us on what we're requiring. And that's something that we will also be verifying as staff as well, to make sure that the complete and correctness of the submitted surveys.
Manager Miller?
As I indicated, I don't know the lake, but I've called it up on the aerial. And many of the houses along the lake have riprap and turf right down to the water line. So, I think our rules would not permit that if they had applied under our existing, our new rules.
They
So
could
this
do
is
it.
gonna exceed what's not normal, but is present on the lake, now. As far as I can see from the aerials anyhow. Especially the riprap and the turf right down to the water's edge.
It'd be on the north end, you're talking.
It's, looks like it's east and north,
Yep, thank you.
and some of the houses are look like they might be in our new, within our new rule of setback from the water's edge.
Well, but turf is permitted
Yeah.
to the water's edge. There's no
Yeah.
prohibition on that. It is permitted.
So, I mean, yeah, that is correct. What would result on this site as a result of our compliance, and also the plan that will be put in place, it won't be riprap, and it will be, a natural shoreline. However, the way that we got here is the reason why we're here. It shouldn't, I mean, if it was part of the development plan to remove invasive species and place natural vegetation in a way that preserves the shoreline's integrity and erosion control properties, then that would have been great, but we didn't have that at the time, so we have to be down this road. But it is it's an accurate observation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Manager Wilson?
A quick question, do you know if the level pumps have fired off this year on Mooney? Have they pumped the water out of the lake?
Yes, I have.
How often have they gone on?
Ms. Domjancic?
They put it on last Tuesday, and they're running currently
Okay, and they'll run until,
until we hit 988. We're at 989.2 today.
thank
That
you.
answered your question? Manager Flex, do you have more questions?
Yeah. I just was curious about the term of cease all land disturbing work, and then is that the same as like a stop work order? Is that on par with, is that what that really means? Is it a stop work order for all work on the site? Is that,
For all land disturbing work, now work that's being done, maybe for the houses that are being built, that there needs to be other work done, specific to those houses, that can still go on, but really what that focus on is the land disturbing work that would, cause more erosion or be liable to not be stabilized properly, as we've seen before, and it's just a way to try to control, what's going on site until we get everything, assessed.
Thank you.
and so I'm just curious, because I know Mr. Smith, it seems like in the past we all, and I'm just for my education, because it's been a while since we've done these. Just to refresh me, because as I recall, it seems to me we have done stop work orders in the past, and and so that would mean more than land disturbing work? I mean, is that like the next step after this step that could be taken? Or is that not a step that we would ever go to?
Madam President, Manager Blixt, when the district issues stop work orders, it refers to the work that's subject to the permit of the district. So it typically is the land disturbing activity, as Ms. Sylvia explained here.
Okay.
Other activity that's not subject to the district permit can proceed. So here the focus is on the erosion problems and stabilizing the site and ceasing any other land disturbing work until things get straightened out.
Okay.
And that's
thank you.
consistent with how we would deal with stop work situations.
Is there any further discussion?
Madam President,
Yes.
I have a question and just a brief note. We had some discussion in the executive committee just distinguishing where the activity has taken place and the areas that are subject of concern. And I don't think that it's a big issue. I think everyone's in agreement, but maybe for the sake of memorializing that discussion on page 6, just before conclusions of law, we could add a new paragraph. It would be one more finding that the board finds that none of the alleged violations have occurred on lots 1 and 2 or 2 of block 1. Just so that discussion that we had is memorialized there. And then, as you know, at the conclusion of the executive committee, we adjourned. There was an opportunity for the staff to meet with Mr. Stickney's team, and I'm just wanting to double check to see if there's any further report from those discussions, or if I suspect most of the discussions were at a level of how to proceed at a logistical way to get concerns addressed. And so if that's the case, then we don't need to take any further action with the order, revisions of the order. And I would just want to report to know on the record that that's where we sit.
Mr. Watson?
We did mention one issue about 2 provisions of the compliance order, namely actions 3 and 7. And the compliance order of compliance is required by next Monday. And actions 3 and 7 do not refer specifically to any area within the development, whereas the others do. So we know precisely what is involved. So if we could get clarification as to the areas of where the bare soils that are concerned in action 3 and the exposed soils and stockpiles in action 7, where those are located, that would make it more feasible for us to comply with the Monday deadline.
Ms. Quinn, Ms. Sylvia?
Yes.
First of all, a question. Do you know which page in our packet that appears on? It's X of 70, I know. If not, you just move ahead.
Attachment D, I don't know what page it's on though.
So he's talking about the letter of non-compliance?
Yeah, correct.
Okay.
Mr. Watson, can I just-
So it's in referencing the compliance order itself that was issued.
It's issued by staff, it's not
Yes,
the board.
Correct.
That was issued on October 6th.
Thank you.
Here.
Yeah.
The attachment I. President White, Board of Managers, Mr. Smith, to, Mr. Watson is correct, we did discuss clarifying action number 3 and 7 to be more site-specific. And I think it is appropriate to identify those areas in relation to the disturbance that has taken place on lots 5, 4, and 3, as well as Prairie View Drive and Outlot F. I'm sorry. Outlot D. Just describing where on site those actions are requested.
And that's an administrative action, we don't need to have a board action on that.
Except to the extent that your order incorporates the requirements of the compliance order.
Madam President?
Mr. Smith?
Yes, paragraph 1 of our order says that the permittee must stabilize the site in accordance with the specific terms of the compliance order. And so we're wanting to have clarity of that. So we could insert a sentence after that sentence in paragraph 1 of the order. Or continue that sentence and add the clarifying language that Ms. Quinn is describing. And I didn't get all of it for the first one. I guess you're referring to both action 3 and action 7.
Correct. So
action 3 would be
is stabilize all bare soils with either erosion controlled blanket or hydro seed, which could also be amended to include hydro mulch. Referencing the areas of bare soils within lots 5, 4, 3, and I believe is outlot D been modified to this area?
The F is just, would have been the driveway that would eventually connect to lot 2. Outlot D is the Prairie Lane, and then there's a legal description of the drainage pond to the west.
Outlot G is the drainage pond.
Okay, so then it would be
So D and G.
outlot D and G then.
So 3, 4, and 5, block 1, and outlots D and G.
okay. So that's for paragraph action 3.
And then action.
And for action 7.
And so action 7 is stated stabilized all exposed soils and stockpiles that have been inactive for 14 days or greater. And the same site-specific language for the lots and outlots can be included for that.
That's 3, 4. Same.
3, 4, and
Yes.
5,
Yep.
block
Lots 3, 4, 5
1.
of block 1 and outlots D and G.
Can I have a motion to amend our action
So moved.
for those two purposes, adding the sentence before conclusions, the last finding, and the compliance order language? I have a motion from Manager Miller. Is there a second to the motion to amend? Second. Manager Blixt, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
And we're back to the main motion as amended. Is there any further discussion? Manager Blixt?
I just want to clarify, just because I'm unclear at this point now after all of that, that little green square is that's where there was a violation, right? And that was where the pond was that still needs work.
So Board Manager's Manor Blitz to further answer that question. This is a plan of the approved erosion control plan with the original permit. When these lots were intended to be developed, this was going to be their main construction entrance. So this is identifying rock construction entrance. This drive has been paved probably about up to here. Which is
Halfway. 300 feet. Right about there.
And the rest has since been seeded at our request and additional erosion control measures. So this is not an area of immediate concern, where the areas of concern in the presentation were the stormwater basin here and a clog culvert that runs underneath the driveway area.
Right, exactly. But that now is still part of the compliance that needs to be met, right? We didn't exempt that area.
Correct. Still needs to be that correct.
Are we ready to vote?
Point
Manager?
clarification. And that stormwater retention pond is in which of the specified areas?
G.
G.
Outlot G.
Thank you.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you very much.
My name
Thank you for approval.
Surveyor.
Yeah. Crazy, crazy making.
Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Sylvia, would you, just in a sentence or two, tell us why the previous item was removed, 11.1?
Yep.
Just for update.
Sure. President White, Board of Managers, permit 14219 was scheduled to be brought before the board as a compliance order because that involved unauthorized disturbance within a wetland. This had taken place over a series of a couple of years, and staff had been working a long time to work with that applicant and bring them into compliance. It eventually culminated in staff bringing together a TEP and bringing the enforcement arm of WACA into play, which is the DNR. And so the DNR a week ago issued a cease and desist order, and then that put into action the Soil and Water Conservation District representative writing a restoration plan that must be put in place for that wetland. And so, being that the impact was a WACA violation, the WACA violation enforcement had been put in place last week via the DNR. And so part of that order for us was to just kind of reinforce that be followed, but that was deemed to be unnecessary. And then one of the items that was still in play for the district was the permittee needed to renew their application that had since expired for this land disturbing work. And since the restoration order required erosion control work, we needed a renewed permit, and that has since come in the mail. We received it today.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Item 11.3, Resolution 16080, Ms. Dunyanchik, authorization to execute an agreement with Great River Greening. And others. I thought they were joining you, I guess they were.
On my own, I guess. President White, managers, tonight staff requests authorization to execute an agreement with Great River Greening to perform vegetation restoration within the Minnehaha Preserve, also known as the REACH 20 project. During the construction and establishment phases, vegetation restoration and namely invasive species removal was focused on areas within the site that would have future trail construction. So really just making a corridor for the trail itself. That was the focus of the invasive species removal during project construction. Once these trail corridors were established, buckthorn removal was expanded to a larger area within the trail corridor to create improved view sheds within the site. In addition to the the invasive plant removal, native species were also planted to provide screenings in these areas where we were trying to screen the trail from surrounding buildings. And now that we have a foothold on some invasive species control and the establishment of native plants on site is in place, we have an opportunity to expand these areas of vegetation restoration and shift the vegetation composition more toward native species. The district has established a partnership with Great River Greening to utilize grant funding ordered through an Outdoor Heritage Foundation grant. These funds would be utilized to continue invasive species removal on the site in these targeted areas, primarily on the western and eastern ends of the site. The western side on the White Weiss property, and then on the eastern end of the site towards the Louisiana Avenue. Working with Great River Greening also provides opportunities for district staff to draw upon the expertise of the ecologists at Great River Greening, and also to possibly utilize their volunteer base for a future volunteer event. The district, as a willing landowner, would provide $17,500 as a cost share portion of the grant, and then Great River Greening would provide the remaining $87,500. Staff requests authorization for the board president to execute the grant agreement with Great River Greening to perform vegetation work within the Minnehaha Preserve and to provide the local cost share for that work. And we ask that this resolution be forwarded to the October 27th consent agenda. I'll take any questions.
Thank you. First, may I have a motion to approve?
Move approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Manager Miller?
I didn't get the scope of the project. The invasive species you're taking out, and some, I noticed some trees are marked. are they taking out those big cottonwoods that are dead?
That's correct, managers. The City of St. Louis Park has identified a number of cottonwoods that have died near the education area. During project construction, those trees did have some soil disturbance and some soil put on top of the roots, and they didn't survive the construction. So we're working with the city to do that removal of the cottonwoods. That is separate from this work that River Greening performed.
That's going to take big cranes and everything, because it's way away from the roads and everything, so.
Correct, yes.
That's going to.
Yeah, it's
And
pretty
that,
costly.
is that on our property or is it on St. Louis Park?
It's not,
Okay,
although we
okay.
are working with the City of St. Louis Park to do a possible cost share.
All right.
It's a big undertaking, as you said. So, yeah, they're.
Now, on the island in the middle of our property, it looks like those, I think they're birch, but I'm not sure, are dead? Did this pond fill up enough to?
Manager Miller, yes. Those birch were an excess of original planting, and so we instructed the contractor to plant those in that area. They did not survive.
No, I'm talking about the ones out on the island, towards, they're like 60 feet tall.
Are you talking about the ones towards Meadowbrook Road?
Yeah,
Excelsior?
towards Meadowbrook Golf Course.
Yes. Those, I think, died during the 2014 flooding, and
Okay.
they had high water.
Is it just they die that quick? Okay.
It's possible they were stressed for a different reason, but yeah, I think the high waters
All right.
finally would get them in.
So we're going to take those dead ones out?
I think that's part of the removal plan when the trail connection goes through
Okay.
along Jack Solson
All
property.
right, thank you.
Other questions before we vote? I have one. The 17,500 is to continue over the course of the entire project, which
That's
goes into
correct.
2019.
The 20% match to River Green's 80% match.
Okay.
That's correct.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed?
That's only a 17% match.
Thank you.
It's a 20% match of the total
17
105,000.
About 105. Okay.
Thank you. And then item 11.4 is the minutes, and there were a few changes to them. Mr. Smith, do you have those changes?
Yes. Madam President, on page 2 at line 67, it reads, "And for the support during his tenure," and his tenure may be 10 years, but it was tenure, T-E-N-U-R-E. I guess it wasn't 10 years. And then you go to page 4, line 134, and correct the spelling of Sunram, S-U-N-R-A-M. Then on to page 5. I'll just read the whole paragraph beginning at line 202. Mr. Erdahl noted that he and Manager White met with Mayor Ken Wilcox of the City of Wayzata, consultant Mary Delatry, and the city manager Jeff Dahl, etc. And then the last sentence reading, Manager White added that the environmental assessment worksheet on the lake effect phase 1 project will be provided to Renee Clark. So these are just several corrections.
With those amendments, is there a motion to approve the minutes?
Move approval.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Am I able to move approval of the minutes if I haven't read them?
If you were at the meeting, it doesn't
Okay.
matter if you read them, but if you were at the
Okay.
meeting,
All
I
right.
think that's how it goes.
Just check.
Item 12.2, Ms. Christopher, a comprehensive plan update.
Thank you, Madam Chair, managers. Tonight I want to provide an update on the status of plan drafting and the schedule. And I will start by just walking through the plan outline that was in your packet, going through the different sections and letting you know kind of the status of each of those, who's working on drafting the different pieces. As we've discussed previously, I believe a similar outline was reviewed previously with the approval of the link contract, and it's continued to be refined and updated since then. But generally, the plan will be structured in 3 volumes, the first one being the executive summary section. And as noted in the outline there, we'll likely be developing a separate version of the executive summary for the plan. It's a piece that's required by Bowser and required to have certain things in there. And then we'll also have a separate executive summary that can be more of a standalone document, similar to the plan preview booklet that's has compelling visuals and is just a little more reader friendly. And so some of the things that will be included in that, in terms of the plan version, are just the general structure and organization of the plan, some background on the organization, why we exist, what area we cover, our history. A big focus of it will be on the organizational approach with the balanced urban ecology policy, our new mission, vision, and goals, the 2-track approach. And then there will be kind of a high-level summary of the implementation plan. So primary issues, goals, major actions, and kind of outline the partnership framework and what's expected of our partners in terms of what we want to see in their plans. The second volume then will be kind of the data volume. That's where we'll have all the required information about the resources, studies that have been completed, kind of all that information if people want to dig into the details. And WENC is currently working on that section. And then really the bulk of the plan will be the third volume, which is the implementation plan. And kind of I'll walk through each of the sections of that. The first part will be kind of the high-level issues, objectives, strategies, and staff is currently working on drafting that, trying to get it a little more streamlined from the 2007 version. With the 17 goals, there was just a lot of kind of redundancies in how things were described in terms of issues and the management strategies to address those. So working on cleaning that up a bit. And then the organizational framework and program overviews will largely be what comes out of the strategic planning effort and the meetings that we're currently having with the PPC, and we'll be wrapping up in the next couple of months. Flipping to the second page then, there will be a section on just the district's implementation model, explaining the 2-track approach, and really a big focus on the partnership framework and the efforts to integrate land use and water planning. And kind of a sub section of that will be outlining the responsibilities of LGUs and what we want to see in their local water plans. And that's something we are currently working with Smith Partners on drafting. And whereas kind of the last plan, kind of one of the main focuses of that section was the load reduction requirements that were assigned to cities. This was prior to Tmdls, and that was a big part of the framework of the 2007 plan, was kind of that 3-legged stool with the rules, district projects, and LGU load reductions. And then there was a fairly extensive list of other requirements as well for cities to put in their plans. And with the new section, really the main focus is going to be on creating a framework for better coordination and integration of plans and identification of opportunities. And so it's going to really be more set up around creating incentives rather than mandates. And so some of the things we'll be requiring is basically share your CIP with us, coordinate before preliminary plat on major development, things of that nature. And we'll also be laying out some of the procedures and expectations for how cities can identify opportunities, get those considered for district projects or cost share or other services. Again, really emphasizing early coordination and good sharing of information. Let's see, moving on then, will be kind of the required procedures for when we want to order projects, when we want to purchase land, approval of cost share grants, those kinds of things. plan amendments, any that we're anticipating, and what the procedure will be for that, evaluation and reporting, how we're going to track progress towards our goals, and share that with the state and our stakeholders. And then, and again, that's a section that Smith Partners is working on. And then the last piece will be all the sub-watershed plans, which are going to be organized into kind of first laying out what the water resource issues, goals, management strategies are. And that's something Mike's currently drafting or has largely completed drafting. And then the next part will be kind of the land use frame and identifying our partners' goals and priorities, what their plans are, what development is projected, those kinds of things. And this is something we're going to be discussing with all the cities starting next month at local sub-watershed meetings, getting that information from them so we can incorporate that into our plan. And then kind of from those two layers, we'll be identifying what the opportunities and priorities are within each sub-watershed. And also kind of recognizing and outlining kind of the unique ways in which we'll work with each city.
Thank you for sharing that.
It's a good thing I announced that Nobel Prize earlier.
It just came. I thought I'd give a little background to the presentation.
Very nice.
I was so distracted.
That was Dylan.
I am sorry you were upstaged by the
No.
Nobel laureate.
No problem. No problem. But as I was saying, kind of the last piece is just trying to recognize that each community is a little different in terms of their priorities and how we might work with them. So we want to also be acknowledging that in these sub-watershed plans and laying out kind of the framework for what we see as being the priorities we want to work on together. And then finally, there will be some appendices with just our public process that we followed, and then the self-assessment looking at progress we made towards the goals of the 2007 plan, which is another piece that I think is largely done. Permitting's been working on pulling together the data from everything we've achieved through our new regulations, and we're also pulling together what we've achieved through projects over the last plan cycle and what cities have reported to us. So that will all be in an appendix. And then finally, the addendum. We should be, at some point before the plan is approved, getting that list of other water courses from the county. That's one of the requirements under the buffer law. And at this point, all we have to do is attach it as an addendum, saying that these are the ones that have been identified. And in the next plan update, we'll be required to address those and consider management of those. So that's kind of the outline and where everything stands. See if there's any questions on that. Otherwise, I was going to just touch on a couple of other things.
Managers, questions? That's great. That's great.
All right. Then the schedule. Last month, the board authorized staff to request a plan extension from Bowser, and all indications are that that will be approved, just from talking to the board conservationist and the region manager, but the formal action from their board won't happen until December. They don't meet in November. They only meet once a month, and they require a pretty far lead time just to get things through subcommittee and then to the board, but there shouldn't be any issues there. And then, as I said, next month we'll be starting the meetings with the sub-watershed meetings with each city, talking about their goals and priorities. And then the goal is to have pretty much everything drafted by the end of the year, hopefully before I'm out on leave. And then my coworkers will be working on review and editing and kind of routing things through the board and advisory committees while I'm out. And then we'll be shooting for distribution in April, and all the different review processes there leading up to adoption in November. Any questions on schedule?
I see no questions. Thank you.
So then the last thing I wanted to just touch on was some potential boundary changes. There are a few that are being pursued right now. Carver WMO initiated a review of their boundaries, I think almost a year ago now, and it's been somewhat on hold. And we'll be circling back with them to see if it could potentially be completed in time to incorporate into our plan and just update all of our figures with the new boundaries. And then a couple weeks ago, I met with staff from Riley Purgatory Bluff Creek Watershed District, and they're redoing their entire boundary. And I think it could be completed in time for our update. They're trying to move that along pretty quickly. And so for either of these, that would need to be approved by the board, and we'll of course be reviewing it at a staff level first, making sure we don't have any concerns. And then we'll look at providing, a summary of the total area, tax impact, some of that information for the board's consideration. And then the third area that's been identified is the Grandview area in Edina, and that's one where we know there's an area that's in our hydrologic boundary but not in our legal boundary, and it's an area that's going to be developing and considering regional treatment, so that's one we might want to clean up as well. But again, not sure on the timing of any of those and if they'll be done in time, and if not, it's just something that we'll list as a planned amendment. It should be minor, not a big deal. Again, just kind of updating the figures. So.
Thank you. Questions for Ms. Christopher?
Does that mean that that Grandview area, does that mean that we're going to is 9 Mile going to give us the Southdale area as well?
I don't know.
We have to look at that, Manager Blix. If we're going to go through a boundary revision, we want to look at the entire boundary. And Southdale is something that I talked to Chris about. A little bit complicated where all the pipe sheds fall and where things drain, but that's something that we're looking at. It's something that we discussed with the city of Edina and the 9 Mile administrator some time ago, before the 9 Mile administrator left to go work at Bowser. So now we're waiting for kind of that staff transition to pick things back up again. So as Becky mentioned, for each of these, we plan on reporting back with the specific areas that would be swapped, tax impact, hydrologic impact, and we'll be able to kind of report back specifically on the South Pole question when we have that info.
They have a new administrator now.
Right. That's
He started a couple weeks ago, I believe.
Yep. Anything else? Thank you.
Thanks.
Mr. Erdahl, we have at 12.2 memo concerning conservation easements.
Thank you, President White and managers. At the last meeting, there was a discussion of potential resolutions for the MAUD annual meeting. And as part of that discussion, the topic of conservation easements came up and was discussed. And there was kind of a request at that time for a review of what the law had been and when it was changed and those types of things. And then I think the goal of the memo that was put together by Michael at Smith Partners was to kind of better inform you so you could kind of choose a course of action going forward, whether this would become a resolution to submit in the MAUD resolution process or something that we could pursue on our own as an organization level, or perhaps look at some administration type definition issues that we could address. The primary, if you've, I know you've had a chance to maybe look at the memo, in 2013, the legislature changed the assessment of lands that were subject to a conservation easement. So that the property value could not be reduced as a result of the conservation easement. There was an exemption in the law, and there's some guidance that's provided on a kind of a one-page fact sheet on the Bowser website too that kind of explains some of this. But there's for riparian buffers along lakes, rivers, and streams that are used for water quantity or quality control, which isn't very well defined. So one of the paths forward could be to help provide or encourage a better definition of what that means. Another might be to work directly with assessors' offices in Hennepin and Carver counties in our case to help them kind of come up with an administrative approach to defining that for their purposes to kind of provide that service to the county. So there might be some alternatives to looking for a legislative change. This was also forwarded along to our lobbyist, and Mr. Carlson kind of weighed in a little bit also on the opportunities. Some of his advice was he provided a little bit more background on how this change came into play by the chair of the tax committee at that time to remedy a situation for properties in his area that were getting a conservation easement with no plans for future development. So it kind of just had a negative impact on the local property tax values. He suggested that any definition changes might be much more likely to succeed than wholesale legal changes to the legislation. And he also mentions, he says, lastly, the outcome on November 8th will have an impact in advancing proactive legislation. And so he would defer developing a complete strategy until after the election. So that was kind of his thoughts on that. And I'm entertain any other questions or thoughts on the matter, or any kind of advice for direction that you have for us.
Manager Blix.
I'm just wondering, since it seems to be clear from the memo that there is not a good definition for the riparian buffer, and that because we're in the process of doing a lot of riparian buffer work in the state, that seems like somebody's going to want that defined more than just us.
Right.
So I guess did Joel give any sense of whether or not that effort might be going forward beyond, aside from us? I would think that there would be others that would want clarity about what constitutes a riparian buffer for tax purposes.
Yeah, Manager Blex, I think I agree that, just to quote Joel directly, he said the suggestions of definition changes to provide clarity may be viewed more positively than repealing the 2013 changes outright. So I think he thinks that would be probably a welcome or kind of more of a friendly amendment, perhaps, to provide some definition to what the riparian exemption really is. There also is an opportunity for perhaps the district and MAUD or others to combine with other lake conservation organizations, some of which have this even as a higher priority, I think, than we do, folks like the Land Trust and others, where this is a pretty significant impact on their approach to land conservation. So we could kind of cooperate and see if there might be a broader coalition too. Again, whether that's kind of something that the district wanted to focus on or elevate to that level, or kind of to what level to pursue, that's something for your direction.
Well, I'll just say I think it's in our interest to get it clarified and ask for better definition, so that when we run into this again, we do have the opportunity to have conservation easements in riparian buffer areas that can be utilized. So I don't know. I'm not tied to any one method. Of going forward on this. I find with
maybe all of the above.
Yeah, exactly. I think a multi-pronged approach might be beneficial.
And I need a reminder, was the definition a statutory matter, or would it be state rules?
I think it could be either, perhaps.
Could be.
So it might not mean changing legislation.
Right. I think the second reference that Mr. Welch provided was kind of in the handbook or guideline to assessors on how to interpret that. But again, it says you may reduce the value of property if the market indicates a reduction. But it didn't really give much more clarity than that. So I think that James and I were also kind of talking about some of these things, and I think that we're looking at some of those administrative options as maybe a more direct path to provide service to our kind of colleagues in that county that might want to kind of have some of the same benefits from conservation easements.
Thank you. Mr. Whisker?
Yeah, that's just building on what Lars said. Yeah, I just want to point out, one of the things that we talked about just very, very briefly internally is how much latitude within the law and the state rules on riparian land, and then how much discretion is delegated in interpretation of riparian land, and the ability to devalue property is granted to the county assessors, because that might be, I looked at Lewis, but that might be one avenue to pursue, is working directly with each of our counties to define a specific process or method of interpretation that if our county counterparts at Carver and Hennepin found acceptable, that might be the most direct route that serves the district, rather than tackling it at a statewide level. But I don't know if that's a realistic avenue to pursue or not.
And that could even perhaps eventually provide a model or a kind of path forward in a larger scale too for the other parts of the state.
Yes.
I don't know anything about this law, and you know, it's pretty complicated, but wouldn't it be some benefit for the urban counties to have their own law? I mean, I can see where the issue in the agricultural areas is so controversial, but it shouldn't. You know, we've got all kinds of different issues, and like 5 counties or 2 counties or 3 counties that don't have that much ag along their lakes and streams might have more flexibility, might request more flexibility.
Well, where it affected us though was when Dayton's heirs couldn't get their property covered with a reduced, assessment. And
At least that's what the newspaper article said. That doesn't mean it's... Wow, I said that out loud. There could be more involved.
Yes.
Okay.
So, what does benefit the district? I mean, that's a good question. We don't have ag land. We don't have forests being turned into residences. But we have some nice water.
Well, and it certainly has been our inclination to try and ensure that people who, aside from us, but, that want to have easements on their property for conservation purposes, we've been very supportive of that if it's part of, and, we certainly want to make sure that people can continue to do that in the future, that as long as it, is a benefit to water quality or, other conservation purposes.
And of course, the large area we have is on Big Island, which is owned by a city, and they're not a taxpayer, so that wasn't an issue at all there. Madge Becker.
Is there still opportunity to put forward a resolution for meeting on?
Tomorrow's the deadline.
Still putting the question down.
That was the answer to your question.
But then the question is, can we do it by tomorrow?
Yeah, all it would take would be for
to draft
Lars,
a couple sentences, yeah.
or somebody to write up it's a 1-page little form that could be easily filled out, and I mean, I guess it wouldn't hurt for us to just, because at the very least, it then brings it to the attention of the other folks in the watershed community, because it gets discussed at the statewide meeting, so it can serve an educational purpose at the very least, even though it's unlikely to have much effect in the big picture, but at least that will, I think, help educate people as to the issue. So I guess I'll make a motion that we go ahead and fill out the 1-page form and submit it to Maud.
What is the language that you would put in that form?
I think we go for the changing the definition of riparian buffer for the purposes as described in the memo.
To define riparian buffer.
Yeah,
Would be option 2.
that's option 2. Bullet 2.
Second.
Mr. Smith?
I think it's a big part of the watershed community.
There you go.
2 quick comments. One is that
Is there any fees?
there was some discussion Manager Blix raised about the relevance of defining buffers given the state buffer law. The state buffer law does have a definition of buffers. It's not terribly precise, but it defines a 50-foot buffer of perennial vegetation that is more of a definition than you have in the tax statute. So that's something to think about. Certainly for this purpose, you could provide further definition and guidance. I also wanted to comment that the third bullet, in which a watershed district would be more involved in, or could be an entity that would certify the resource value of the easement. It's not mutually exclusive. You could do both of those things. And I don't know if the board's inclination is to urge watershed districts to explore that role, but that's another thing to think about.
I'm not opposed to that. I don't think it'll go very far. But it certainly, we could certainly include it in our memo to MAUD as a possibility, and they can vote it up or down.
Why would we preclude any of the 3?
Oh, just list them all as possible options?
I haven't looked at the form lately, but I don't know why we couldn't.
Madam Chair, one would be quite, what would you say, controversial.
Yeah, it'd be taken on a large number of other constituents.
In other words, it wouldn't pass MOD, right?
Potentially not.
I think I completely understand the statement about working with the assessors. Could I hear that again?
My question was if riparian lands or riparian buffers aren't precisely defined in statute or rule for tax law purposes, what level of discretion is delegated to the people that are responsible for being able to devalue under that exception, which is the county?
Mm-hmm.
And if there's an opening for discretion there, could we not work with the county to create some latitude that has a broad definition of riparian buffer, riparian land, and work through a process for how we define the conservation value of that and work with the county on what their methodology would be for devaluing it? If you could create that framework at a county level, you'd be able to communicate some level of certainty to landowners that we're trying to work with, that there's a safe haven. If you want to go the route of providing a conservation easement, here's the process with Hennepin or Carver by which they define riparian land and devalue it. And then I don't know if that's even close to being feasible, but if it were, it would avoid doing it legislatively.
Madam Chair, the county assessor has the authority to make the reduction. What you would do is get a working agreement with the county assessor.
Yeah.
One thing to think about this whole area is the nonprofits that are trying to buy easements will work in the place where it's easiest to sell the easement. And if we had something that differentiated our watershed from other watersheds, it might drive investment here by the nonprofits. Madam President.
Thank you. Yes.
I would just add that the idea of working and having discussions with the county auditors is a parallel track that you could pursue alongside a MAUD resolution that pushes bullets 2 and 3. So you could do all of 3 of those things.
I understand this to say, though, footnote 5, that the auditors no longer have discretionary authority.
They don't have complete discretionary authority, but what they do have, Madam President, is the authority to reduce the value in the case of a riparian easement. And so the
that's-
discussion the district would have would be to help, from a watershed perspective, define the water resource benefits of those types of easements that would give the assessor comfort that there's a basis for, that it's a meaningful donation of value and therefore there's a reason to reduce the value.
So we have a motion actually to get a definition of riparian border, motion and second. Do you feel like you want to amend that to have the bullet points 2 and 3?
Yes.
And to simultaneously pursue bullet point 1 apart from mod?
Well,
But wouldn't need a board action, but we could indicate it.
I believe the motion would be to simultaneously and begin negotiations with Carver and Hennepin County auditors on implementation of the current statutes.
I would agree with you, except I think it's not the auditors.
Excuse me, the assessors. Thank you.
You know, and let me say this about my concern about that approach is that, speaking as a current, government bureaucrat, it's most of those kind of agreements are only as good as the person that you negotiate it with, and that so that when the current person in place leaves and you get a new person in, I mean, it doesn't necessarily stay true to the previous person in that seat. In my experience, I mean, and so that's why I think having a dual approach is probably the best way to go about it, just so that we can establish precedent with the current folks in our two counties, but we certainly, I think, want to ensure that we have a backup for the future.
Do you want to try to do 2 and 3 simultaneously? Put them in the mod resolution? Are they alternative, or do they go together? Or are they alternatives?
Madam Chair, I believe they're alternatives.
I think so too.
But I think we can put that, there's room in the mod format that we could propose them that way.
As alternatives?
Yeah.
And then I assume that the mod resolution committee could make some edits or changes as they see fit in that as part of the process.
And they will.
So we don't have to wordsmith it to the final form, maybe.
So I would need a motion to amend to submit 2 and 3 in the alternative and to pursue number 1 simultaneously or in tandem on our own. Someone want to make that motion?
Well, I think number 1 was the one we aren't going to pursue in.
Not as a part of an initiative.
Correct. The alternative to number 1 is to pursue through our county assessors ourselves and come up to some sort of agreement to work with them.
The motion would be to submit bullet points 2 and 3 as alternate possibilities in a request for a resolution mod, and at the same time to pursue not number 1, but to pursue working with county assessors.
Correct.
Is there a motion to amend to that effect?
So moved.
Manager Becker, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Blix, discussion. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And the motion is amended. Any discussion? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ardall, Mr. Smith, and Mr. Brisker. Administrator's report. Administrator Ardall.
Thank you, President White and managers. Just a few updates. I attended yesterday, speaking of MAUD, I attended an ADA meeting, the Association of District Administrators, met in Fergus Falls yesterday. So I was had a long commute yesterday to Fergus Falls for a meeting. And there were 19 administrators there, and kind of the topics of the agenda included talking about the MAUD Education and Training Survey, the current kind of version of the draft of the strategic plan that I believe the MAUD board had some action on at a meeting last week, and is going to be coming in front of the membership for consideration at its annual meeting in December. Also some talk about transition planning for how the organization is staffed, information about the annual meeting, and then also starting to talk about the summer tour next summer and some of those things too. So,
Mr. Renaud,
yes.
Can I just ask, do they have is there a plan for going forward on the staffing for MAUD that they talked about at all?
My understanding is that the strategic plan that they have is a little bit more of kind of an organizational structure going forward. So it does address kind of the need for having some staff positions created. One that would, I think, likely be an executive director position, and one that's kind of more focused on program and event administration. The timing of that and all the specifics are still somewhat to be determined, so that they don't have there's some discussion still going on about what budget or impact that would have, and also the timeline. Those are kind of the two critical pieces that are still to be determined. And also as part of that budget discussion, I think they're also looking at different types of fee structures too for the dues for watershed districts. Yeah, I don't think ours would likely go down in their new dues structure they would propose. There was pretty frank discussion about making sure that if things like increased dues were considered, that the MAUD has to demonstrate and articulate its value that it provides to its member districts, both in the metro area and also in the non-metro area, because there's some very distinct differences in terms of some of the issues and challenges that we face. And at the same time, there is benefit to have a unified kind of voice and message, but we didn't, I don't think there's consensus that was being maximized currently.
Thank you.
Also, like many of the district staff, I've been participating in a lot of strategic plan working group meetings. It's been a big time commitment for staff as we go through this strategic planning process, but it's also been very rewarding. I think it's kind of really helping everyone take a look at our organization and not only what we do, but why we do it, and kind of how it fits the mission and how the different parts of the organization fit together too. So I think it's been a very useful process. So I want to thank staff for being very participative in all of that process. We had a quarterly meeting with our auditor earlier this week, and as part of that we have the letter of engagement that I would like to bring forward for your approval and the consent agenda for the October 27th Board of Managers meeting. I actually do have copies of the letter of engagement if anybody would like to see that now. The cost of the audit is right in line with last year's. I think the total cost for the district and cold storage was about $30,000, and I think this year it's about $31,000. So it's comparable. So if anyone would like a copy of the letters of engagement, I have those, and we'd like to bring those for your approval at the October 27th meeting as part of the consent agenda. And lastly, I think everyone has received the MAUD booklet and the plan for the annual meeting. So if people are interested, Chris Lizzie's making reservations. I know last year she I think already reserved rooms, so that last year we didn't have any in the main resort lodge, and she reserved some, and we can cancel if needed, but we won't be shut out of the conference center this time. So please contact her if you're interested in attending. That's the 1st through 3rd of December.
Where did people go last year?
I
the
was
Holiday Inn. I think most was the Holiday Inn across the highway.
It's about 15 miles away.
It wasn't quite that far.
It was horrible.
It was like 8 or 9. It was not close.
Yeah.
And that's all I have.
Let's end with the report. The meeting is adjourned.